Hi, and welcome to Zessions. We are, as always, so glad that you're here today. And whether you are tuning in for the first time or you've been with us before, thank you for being a part of our growing community. My name is Mandi Roarke, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I am based out of Austin, Texas, but I support clients all over Texas. And I am also one of the co-founders of Zesho.
I'm Dr. Sapna Srivastava, also a co-founder of Zesho. Zesho is a platform that we've come up with to make resources from mental health clinicians more accessible to folks like you. And these sessions are real grounded conversations between clinicians where we explore the kinds of themes and topics that come up in the everyday work that we do with our clients.
In this episode, we are so excited to have Kendall Campbell with us. Hello, buddy. He's our friend. He's our go-to therapist, and we've had him on podcast before, or Zessions episodes before, I should say. So we're just so grateful that you're here. We'll have Kendall introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your practice and you.
Yeah. Well, I'm super grateful to be back, returning. Woo!
Yeah.
As you said, I'm Kendall Campbell. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the Austin, Texas area, but like you guys mentioned as well, also provide telehealth to the greater Texas area, right? I tend to specialize in working with pretty high conflict couples generally dealing with things such as addiction, infidelity, general breaches in trust. So I kind of see a lot of the contention.
Mhm. And as you were just putting your hands up to each other, as it kind of represents what we're going to be talking about today, not hitting the hands, but of the this
High conflict.
this high conflict that people experience. We will probably primarily be talking about this in the context of romantic relationships today, this push and pull of intimacy, but we're also, I think, hopefully going to make this where it's conceptual enough where you can think about your own scenarios, whether it be with someone that's non-romantic as well or somewhere in between. So just wanted to acknowledge that up front. So our episode is all about this push and pull, this tug of war, and you're going to hear us probably use a therapist technical term for that as the bind. And so let's kind of just dive in. Oh, actually, no, Sapna, you have a whole other part.
Yes, I have a little bit of stuff first. Yes, our episode will be a little more conceptual. But
Mhm.
before we dive into all of that, just our quick housekeeping note. If you are enjoying sessions, we'd be really grateful if you took a moment to follow us, rate, review on your favorite platform for podcasts. It really helps us, and those who might benefit from these conversations find their way here. You can also follow us at My Zesho on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And you can check out more of our mental health resources at zesho.com. That's zessio.com. And yeah, getting into the technical stuff here. So this will probably be a little bit more conceptual. We're going to do our best to make things more tangible when we can and slow each other down and have
Mhm.
each other break things down and give examples when we can. But we are going to talk about the concept of binds, is what we call them as clinicians. But how would you all define binds just for your clients, essentially?
Yeah, so there's a number of different types of binds, right? The one that I tend to see most in my practice are what I call intimacy binds, which is where a couple will an individual will have a desire for something, some type of intimacy within a relationship. The common one being like I want sexual intimacy or I want emotional intimacy, and I feel as if I want that in a relationship, but in order for my partner to provide that to me, they need something of me as well. And I'm at the bind where I can't provide you with what you're looking for unless you provide me with what I need, and you can't provide me with what I need until I give you, right? But there's a couple different things that are binds that we experience outside of romantic relationships, right? The common one that individuals will see will be an initiation bind, right? Just how can I bring myself to do something that maybe I want to do, but in order to do that, I need something else first. A really, really kind of simple, silly example of that would be I really need to go to work and be productive and be efficient. Um, in order to do that, I need coffee. Or I really want to go to work and be productive and efficient, but in order to do that, I need coffee, right? Or I need something else in the beginning. And it's not that it inherently prevents us from going to work, for example. It might, I guess, but it really stifles our ability to be there, to engage, to be the person we want to be when we're there. It's that bind.
I think about, well, first, I think it's helpful to acknowledge. So, things that I'm trying to keep my attention on as we're talking through this is the initiation bind and how that will influence the intimacy bind. And just because we're talking about binds here, when I think about binds, I think about a double bind from a family systemic concept in that it's these lose-lose situations, but the double binds show up in relationships often through how you're communicating something. It's like, I need you to do X, and when the person does X, there's an undesirable response as Y that puts the person doing X being like, what, like this, these are opposing things. I'm in this impossible situation here based on what you're asking me to do. And so that's definitely something that I'm gonna try to kind of break it apart from the intimacy and the initiation, but I do feel like there's so many overlapping themes when it comes to binds just in general.
Yeah.
Yeah. The important thing to know is that for kind of the common person coming in, they're relatively synonymous. We can use they're almost interchangeable. If a client comes in and says that I'm stuck in this position where I want something and my partner wants something and we can't find a way to bring it, to resolve this, find compromise, I know that is you're in a bind. What type of bind? I'll be able to determine, and then when I can be very specific for you, that's useful information, but it's not required that you need to know specifically like I'm coming in and I have an intimacy bind. It's whatever, however you convey it is fine. We
Yeah.
understand it as binds though.
I
Yeah.
appreciate that because it's not that it's just this like in order for you to change the dynamic, I have to clearly understand what it is. It's more about I can feel it. And the feeling that I experience when I talk about binds or I've had binds myself is I just feel sort of trapped here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're feeling that sense of trap, then it's, I think we'll talk more about that though as we go, as far as like the awareness of does a bind even exist? But one thing too, just for clarification, I find myself when we started preparing for this conversation, talking about binds, and as I'm thinking about double bind again, and as you're putting your hands together at the beginning, visually for me, I see a bind as the gridlock, like there's these two wheels. Maybe they're turning in the same direction, or maybe they start turning in the opposite. But ultimately, they're these wheels with these. They basically just get stuck into each other, and it's that gridlock right there that is where we experience the bind. And so it's just for me as a therapist, it's like, how do we actually open that up and create a little bit of movement around? And so I think I'm just gonna be really curious to get your thoughts too. Is it like, how do you help people when it comes to these intimacy binds too? Because I feel stuck. I feel trapped. Those are pretty deep, vulnerable feelings.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Paralysis is the thing that I hear a lot. I Paralysis or status quo of like everything is just the same. Some clients even come in with a sense of awareness of like we know what we need to solve. We know what we need to fix. I know I need this. I know he needs that or she needs that. We're aware of this, but nothing we do seems to matter, right? We don't have the bandwidth. We don't have the energy. Why is this not working, right?
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, it's certainly it's that sense of paralysis leading to status quo. We've been doing this same old song and dance for 5, 10, 25 years, right? Is super common. And then as clinicians, when we experience that, especially early on, of like, I don't know what to do here, right? We're feeling a tinge of what the client's experiencing, right? That little
Mhm.
transference experience.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
When you say status quo, like how would you share with a client what status quo means in relationship terms?
Yeah. So status quo in my experience from my definition is it is it's the same old day in, day out, rinse and repeat of routine, where routine is no longer fulfilling or enjoyable or provides the sense of safety or security that it once was. It's now gotten to the point to where it's mundane, it's boring, it's having a detrimental effect, right? Safety and security are great, right? And knowing my 9 to 5, what I can expect, knowing what's going to happen when I get home, I'm going to do A and B and C is useful because it's serving me in some capacity. But at a later point, when routine settles in, it doesn't have the same value, it doesn't have the same shiny effect that it used to, and so now it's become more of a detriment.
Mm. Yeah, I wanted to back us up a little bit, and because we're talking about binds and we're talking about them in a little more abstract ways, which I mentioned would happen. So I
Yeah.
wanted us to
Mhm.
like talk about an example. So I think when we were kind of preparing, especially in talking about the intimacy binds, we were
Yeah.
talking about the example if we're gonna kind of exaggerate this in a very heteronormative situation of oftentimes there's one partner, oftentimes, but not always, the female or the woman who wants emotional intimacy before physical or sexual intimacy, and the other partner often needs physical or sexual intimacy before they can engage in emotional intimacy. And so that becomes a very common scenario that comes up with couples in therapy that becomes a bind of like, we get stuck. There's no solution here where we can both win. Um, but oftentimes they've been successful in the past, right? Of being able to initiate intimacy and not get stuck in this bind, in this gridlock of I can't meet your needs before my needs are met and you can't meet my needs before your needs are met. um and so what are ways that you kind of explore what's underlying that, or what are ways that you kind of help the couple or make meaning of like what's going on underneath there?
Yeah, so to kind of bring the two terms we were discussing together, status quo and intimacy binds, um, it's quite common that a lot of couples that I work with will come in, they've been in a relationship for 5, 10, however many years, right? Not just newlywed type experience. And early on in the relationship, they certainly were able. I mean, there was anything that may have had an asterisk next to we want better sexual intimacy, but it's good, it's okay for now, right? They that works because status quo is present, because routine, I should say, is present. And then when the routine is no longer providing that energy and that resource, that benefit, it shifts into status quo. And at that point it's just a bit of a holding pattern and a weight. You're slowly, think of it like a gas tank that has a hole in it, right? You can still drive for quite a bit of time. You're dropping maybe a couple of ounces every so often, but at some point, unless you address that hole, unless you change, change the fuel tank or fuel it up in a different way, you're going to be out. Then you can't, as much as you want to move the car moving forward, as much as you want to go to the destination you want to go, you can't drive anymore, right? And it's no one's fault, right? Arguably, it's just the nature of the situation. And so one of the first things that I try and help couples understand is that one, the needs that you each have, the intimacies that you're expressing, wanting, they're both fair, right? It's totally fair for me to want emotional intimacy and you to want sexual intimacy, or me to want intellectual intimacy and you to want spiritual intimacy, right? And not to go on too much of a side tangent, but the there's five types of intimacies that I tend to look at when I'm looking at couples. Pretty much, if you come in and you start talking about anything in your relationship, I'm categorizing as a therapist, me personally, where this falls into intimacy wise. Intellectual, emotional, physical, sexual, and then spiritual for those couples that have faith, right? Um, so I'm validating first what's coming up for them, right? Validating the fact that your need is just as important as your partner's need. I'm highlighting that it's really, in the car example, it's no one's real fault, right? A lot of times, because status quo has been in effect, we've been allocating energy and time and resources towards other things, right? Common experience of that is if you have a couple of, if you have kids, right? We know through research and through study that relational satisfaction diminishes because you choose to, as you should, I would argue, allocate time and energy towards your kid or kiddos, right? Is that anyone's fault at that point for when intimacy slides? No, right? So normalizing that, validating that is the first thing before we begin to identify very specific examples of how it plays out in that particular couple's experience.
And that makes me think too, just about the transitions of relationships, just in general,
Yeah.
where that as we look at the example of this intimacy bind that you were talking about, I think about the transitions that relationships go through. And I mean, this is something that I feel like we learned pretty early on in grad school, and it's always one that I like to just share as an example. I don't think that it's set, but it's the honeymoon phase, and then you have the power struggle phase, and the power struggle phase lasts for a lot longer than maybe what theoretically maybe it says for like what is it, the 90 days or a year out to 7 years. I mean, we could look that up to give what the actual theory suggests, but the point is that power struggle is part of it. And so to me, when we talk about binds, I do feel like it is this power struggle that can start. Maybe it starts from the beginning, or maybe it evolves as time goes on based on context changing or fatigue and burnout that's inevitably at play. But I think that it's important to explain that, to normalize it a little bit, like, hey, it's like understandable that you're going to have some of this tug of war just in general, because a lot of relationships do tend to go through these phases.
Yeah, very
So
much
hold
so.
on for a second, because actually the next part is the joining of that, right? So like, don't just assume that you're going to be stuck in a power struggle forever. I feel like breaking the intimacy bond or getting curious, or bind, getting curious around that can bring you more into the joining of like, we're on the same team here. How are we figuring out how to essentially try to get everyone's needs met? It feels way too simple as I'm saying it though, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's therapy, easiest obvious statement ever. Therapy is complex because people are complex, right? Dealing with one person is already hard enough. Dealing with two makes it infinitely more complicated, right? Relationships have, you talked about the honeymoon phase, the limerence period, right? And then transitioning else. There's also a period, or another way to kind of overlap that is that early on you have an experience of passion or a passionate relationship. I view my partner as a passionate person. And that shifts. It's not a bad thing that it shifts, but it shifts to more of a companionate type of love, right? Relationships that typically go on for 5, again, 10 years, we have that kind of uh colloquialism of like the 7-year itch, right? Relationships that have been basically 5 years and on hit that point where you've officially shifted from passionate to more companionate. You've cultivated a life with your partner. You have theoretically you have kids, or you have attachments, you have grounding roots in some area. And a lot of times what happens at these points is that much like we have midlife crises, couples do the same thing. They have reflecting points where they look back, and oftentimes they look back at being in a relationship, which is a very different type of relationship, limerence, passion, right? And then they want what they don't have, right? And then all of a sudden, status quo sinks in. There's this notion of, oh, the routine of which I've been relying on, which has been useful for me for 5, 6, 7 years, however long, doesn't feel the same. And then, like most things, like learning how the sausage is made, when you know it, you can't unknow it. And then it kind of sits with you. And that's where a lot of times I'll then see the conversations and where conflict starts to kind of arise, right? It doesn't start off nuclear. It starts off like, hey, I want this. And then partner not able to respond or not able to fulfill that request. And that happens over the course of days, weeks, months, maybe even years, to the point to where when they usually come in the office, it's I want this, or I need this, I need this. And that's the clash, fists together type
Mhm.
thing, right? Emotionally speaking.
Hmm.
Yeah, and it sounds like there's almost like inherent momentum oftentimes in the beginning stages of a relationship that kind of carries like the inherent passion, so that you kind of are able to meet each other in the middle more effortlessly, oftentimes, not
Absolutely.
always, but oftentimes. And then inherently, as you said, it kind of gets to the point where it takes a different shape, and your needs change, your partner's needs change, you know, your biology changes, and that affects your needs and how often they arise and all of that. And so
Yep.
um it is super normal for this stage to occur after a couple years, or even in the beginning, but like especially after the more companionate phase begins.
Yeah.
And so really validating that for people, I think, is really important, because I don't know that they necessarily recognize that this is as common as it is, even if it's a shift in your dynamic. And then it feels like you're stuck, and how do you get out of that? And so um, I want my initial curiosity is to jump ahead into how do we help them kind of break out of that. But I,
Well, I want to
before we
call
go into
something
that,
out too for a second, because I was talking about power struggle in the context of, typical phases that relationships go to. And I really like what you were saying about passion to more companion. And I think that, when I was learning about the stage of joining, and when I talk about it with couples too, of just like you really do feel like you have a teammate, like you're on the same team, you're fighting, you're winning, like what you want out of this life, right? But I think that sometimes couples can feel really happy and settled, and even the status, maybe the status quo has more of a negative meaning, but it's almost like the pattern of their life can feel really comforting, and
Sure.
like, yes, I'm safe here, I have this person on my team, but yet there can be areas within the relationship that they're not, like, maybe they do. I think you're kind of alluding to this earlier, Kendall, of like, there might be a need for more passion, but then trying to work through it usually involves difficult conversations, which then can almost take couples. This is catastrophizing it majorly, like worst case, it can almost make them feel like they're going back to the power struggle phase. And I just wanted to differentiate that there's like relationships are so hard because it's with multiple people and multiple needs. And so in the event that you are experiencing a bind like this, but you also feel like there's so much good here, to just normalize that a bit too, to say there might just be some power struggles that appear, but we can, and I am kind of jumping ahead now to Sapna, but it's like, how can we attend to and work through those specific areas without feeling like, oh, the whole relationship is completely doomed now because we were good and now we have this one thing that is
Yeah.
really hard and not great.
Yeah. Uh there's no really one, like most things, there's no really one formal solution to this stuff, right? I'm always drawn to this notion of I was told, and I imagine maybe y'all were as well, by people much older and much smarter than us when we were kids, like, take $5 and set it aside, put it in a bank account, and then every month put $5 in. And by the time you're 20, you'll be so far ahead. And like if we had done that back then, we would argue, not even arguably, very much be much more ahead than what we are, right? The relational version of that is what most people have, I think, pretty much heard at this point of like, continue to always date your partner, right? Continue to invest in them. Continue to redefine your relationship by revisiting things that you knew and ensuring those things are still the same, right? From the like the mundane and innocuous and very boring of like, what's your favorite color? Like, is it still blue, right? To the more extreme of like, are you still enjoying the position? Are you still enjoying your career, right? Or has esthetology still, is it no longer a thing and you want to go into nursing or whatever, right? Like exploring those things. And that's the easy, very broad way of like painting the, broad strokes of like how you can help solve this problem from ever really occurring. But the reality is like life gets in the way, right? With me, if I'm trying to save $5, well, I get a flat tire. A bad example as a 5-year-old, but I want to buy a piece of candy, and there goes $2 of that, right? And so there are things that get in the way of contributing in the way that you quote unquote should, right? The romantic relationship version, or one of the romantic relationship versions of this, is like, I have kids, I buy a house, I'm investing into I'm trying to become a partner at my firm. I'm investing time in areas that very much culturally, societally, I should invest in. It's appropriate. It's okay to invest in, right? And it's not intentionally at the expense of my partner. Hell, it's collaborative. My partner is encouraging me to do that. But It's when that becomes the new norm and I forget to then go back to or fold these things that I'm doing back into the romantic relationship to where it's interwoven. That's whenever that status quo kind of sets in. That's when we see this 5 years, 10 years later, this aha awoke, this awakening of, oh, this is not the relationship it once was. This is not the relationship I want it to be, type of thing. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. I
So
think,
I think you start by, just to identify how to become aware. I said earlier, it's like when you feel the sense of trapped, but when you're giving that example, I think that's another scenario where it's like, man, like this just isn't kind of how I envisioned my relationship being. And it doesn't have to feel overly entrapping, but just kind of, I mean, just like noticing disappointment or sadness or helplessness, getting really curious about your emotions that you're
Yeah.
feeling. Because I think once you become aware of it, I mean, I know I've shared this language in here, and it's something that Dan Siegel coined, but the name it to tame it. It feels to me more empowering to be able to say, okay, there's a bind here. And I don't have to know if it's the initiation, intimacy, I feel a bind. And so, how can I zoom out from that bind for a second and really get some more context to what is maybe contributing to that bind? So, the exploration there, on top of the awareness, I feel like is really our job as therapists to help open that up.
It is. That's not because you can't do it by yourself. You certainly can, but it's incredibly overwhelming because as we're kind of talking about it, generally people don't experience, they don't recognize these things until years later when you have thousands of days that have added up and thousands of emotions that haven't been processed and thoughts. And so trying to look into this is exceedingly difficult. And what people do, which is where how we tend to see binds show up, is they focus on action, right? So she's not having sex with me. Action, right? Not exploring the what might be behind that, or what does sex mean to you? Why is that significant? What's the value of that? To explore that by yourself is really, really difficult. Possible, but difficult, right? That's what we want to try and explore. That's what we try and facilitate early on as therapists is okay, each of these things, as Sapna highlighted, they're totally valid, right? What you want, beautiful, wonderful, great. Equally what you want, beautiful, wonderful, great, right? Do you know why you want those things? Do you want them because you were told to want them? Do you want them because you wanted them 10 years ago, 15 years ago? Is what you're describing what you experienced then or what you want now? How have you it's just that I use the the silly sports metaphor, and I'm not a sports person, but like moving the chains forward, right? It's just reassessing your experience of who you are within the relationship and who your partner is within the relationship. And that's a lot. It's overwhelming. That's why you have us to kind of funnel that direction. Start with A, then move to B. Otherwise, a lot of times it's start with A, move to Z, move to D, move to
Mhm.
numbers. All of a sudden, we have 15,000 things that we're talking about, and we don't even know where we started. Right.
Mhm.
yeah. Yeah, I had a couple different thoughts as both of you were talking, and Mandy, you mentioned, I think it was you, mentioned the concept of like being teammates initially, and then uh, really focusing on what each other needs and what's best for the team. But I would imagine as we progress in the stages of a relationship, or if anything kind of harmful happens within the relationship at any stage, it's easy to kind of refocus on ourselves as individuals and like what our needs are, like what my needs are, rather than what the team's needs are and what my teammates' needs are, and how we can, meet in the middle type of thing, and then kind of get stuck in that pattern.
Yeah.
But then also, as y'all were talking about the status quo, I kept thinking about how novelty is something that's really helpful for us as individuals, but especially for couples to
Yeah.
experience together to kind of make things create difference and create change in some way, even small ways. And so engaging in those date nights, doing things that you haven't done together before, as well as things that you've done before and might want to do experience differently, or brings you back to kind of the initial friendship that you had, but kind of doing both. And in some ways, going to therapy is a way of that novelty, is introducing this third person who can kind of help create a difference in how we understand each other and is maybe a solution that we haven't tried before or are trying in a new way.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's incredibly, I mean, trying something entirely novel, entirely new, again, it's incredibly difficult to do, right? We have a desire to do it. I know I need change. I know I want change, but trying to reinvent the wheel is really difficult a lot of times. So if you happen to have the ability to make it to therapy, or even if you don't, if you're just listening to this session and you pick up something new, one of the things that I think is meaningful is look at we start to flip status quo on its head. Let's look at what has been routine and let's see if we can, rather than try and necessarily interrupt that pattern by bringing something new, tweak something that you're already doing, right? So you have family dinner every night. Okay, well, how can we tweak family dinner to look just slightly different, right? How can we imbue a question or questions? You have decompression at the end of the night where you're both getting, brushing teeth and all that jazz. How can I change that by a couple minutes at a time? Something that's just relatively small, right? If I ask you historically how your day was at the end of the day, right? And I get the same mundane normal answer, which I want that to be present, but how can I now shift it, if only a little bit, change the language, 2 words, 3 words, right? Or add one more question, right? Am I still creating novelty? Yes. Is it still difficult to do? Yes. But am I trying to do something really, really out of the norm? Not really, right? Anything to kind of prevent that. I call it the Netflix phenomenon. I don't think I coined that, but like it's the I know we want to watch something, we want to do something, right? Okay, so we sit on Netflix. What do you want to watch? I don't know. And we keep scrolling, and then the event becomes the 45 fucking minutes of scrolling as opposed to actually watching something, right? Versus if I had just said, we know we like action movies. We don't care if it's something like we don't care if it's something we've seen before. If I start to just slightly change versus trying to do something entirely new, it becomes a little easier.
Well, I think that ties in with a question and thought that I have around how the initiation bind comes in here, because I think that when there's a power struggle present or a bind, I keep using those words together, then as you work with high conflicts, as I do as well, and so then they're already, not every time, but it's a little turned up. Like I have had this unmet need for a while, and now this is great redirection. Now I am in therapy and we are doing something about it, but
Yeah,
I definitely can sense pressure of like, we need to meet this need. There's a solution that we're after for this. And so I think about the pressure and how for some people, pressure is motivating. For some, I mean,
crippling.
it is. And
Yeah,
so it makes me just really curious around the initiation. Binds here too, because it's like, all right, if I'm feeling all this pressure, it's not just about being like, this is too much, I'm just going to sit in that paralysis. But I think
yeah,
it goes back into what you were sharing was more like, these are some ways to break that down and for it to decrease the pressure, for this not to feel as overwhelmed. And then I think there's also this other emotional side too of like, what does this pressure represent within you, or what else might be contributing to the bind that you might be feeling more internally to meet your partner's needs. So then it's causing you to not initiate, right?
yeah, completely. I mean, the ideal is that we, when I have an internal sense of pressure, that paralysis of I know I want something, but I need something in order to provide to get what I want, it's all an internal struggle originally, right? I can want to save my relationship. I can want to provide the thing that you're looking for. I can want to provide sex for you, but I know I need this first. So that in itself is crippling, and a lot of times that just stays in paralysis for a long time. Coming to therapy is having another person. Why I mentioned earlier, we start with acknowledgement, awareness, and validation. Knowing that someone else experiences or can at least see that pressure is massive. Now all of a sudden that pressure isn't entirely on me, right? Ideally, if it comes from your partner is the one that's saying, I get that. I see that's what you're needing. And I'm also hoping that you see that I'm needing the same thing. That sounds like most couples would have done that. And they do, but they do usually do that through conflict, right? you don't give me what I want. And it's a very different approach than saying, this is why I need what I need. This is what it means to me. This is why I value it. This is what's important. This is how, when I get this, I hope to then provide that to you, right? It's a very different experience there, right? So sometimes we as therapists serve as that buffer and we model for the partner what that looks like. Then the next kind of phase of this, I mean, I hate to be so binary, but the reason it does typically fall with this is that one person inevitably, it feels as if they have to kneel. They have to be the one that initiates vulnerability, right? Someone's got to give. Ideally, you both give, but one person inevitably is going to feel like I'm the one giving first, right? That's just usually the brass tacks of it, right? One, we can collaboratively talk about that, all three of us together, and say, okay, if you make a commitment, can you also can make a commitment? Now the pressure is somewhat off because I'm hearing my partner collaborate with me, make that commitment together. And so I have a little less worry or doubt, a little bit less, that when I do X, you'll do Y, right? That's an easy way of going about it. That's kind of low-hanging fruit. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
But I think that's essential for us to guide them through that
You think
because
it
what you're describing to me equals this process of them putting down the boxing gloves and
Yes,
being like, we are in the same corner here. We're
yes,
both working on it together and then getting creative and curious around what does that actually look like for each of
completely.
us.
And depending on the length of the relationship, our jobs are to highlight, what they can expect. One of the biggest roadblocks early on, especially if the relationship has been together for an extended amount of time, is they've already developed this oftentimes kind of rigid confirmation bias. And so even if we made the commitment of, okay, we're in therapy and I'm sure I'm going to tell you, I'm going to try and lean forward. And you're telling me you're going to lean forward. The reality is that I, or we as therapists, the outside person, when we're debriefing and saying, how was the week? And I say, and George says, I did A, B, and C. Sarah, the wife, is going to say, I didn't see any of that stuff, right? And it instantly then feels invalidating and it feels like we're back into status quo. And a lot of times that's not to be malicious or it's not to be invalidating. It's because I've I'm so used to experiencing one aspect, one way of you and how you respond that any differentiation, my brain filters it out, literally filters it out, right? And so it's a process. I mean, I hate to say time, but it is a process of time paired with um, identifying what the subtle changes in these things and taking time to expand upon what value that those changes currently mean or what value you hope them to mean, right? Getting them out of this kind of entrenched muck of the way things have always been is really it takes time. You can't expect, I mean, we have the vomit inducing Rome wasn't built in a day cliche, right? You can't expect something to have been occurring for 5 years to then change in 5 days or 5 weeks even, right?
Mhm.
It takes a lot longer than that. And it takes and all the while you're placing your position yourself in a ton of vulnerability every single day, every single hour, right? There is a way in which you can be vulnerable and you either choose to or not. And your partner is hopefully matching that, right?
Yeah.
The other the more direct route, which sometimes therapists we kind of lean into, and this is useful, I think, for other therapists, but also to to not be so shocked or surprised if you're a client and your therapist provides something this. We provide um, direct prescriptions, right? So an example of this would be the therapist saying, I realize that you're both in this bind, and I'm gonna do the work for you a little bit, and that instead of you trying to come up with or determining who's gonna kneel first, who's gonna be the vulnerable, I'm going to tell you who's going to do it, right?
Yeah.
This is the action that Sarah, you're going to engage in. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't stop there because that would be highly invalidating to the other person, right? Great.
Mhm.
So we came to therapy just so they could side with you. All right, great. It's
Mhm.
not that. That's the direct prescription, but that's usually followed by taking the time to understand, to help the partner who is getting what they want, understand the sacrifice and truly what it means for their partner to lean in to do these things. If I don't want to provide you emotional intimacy because I'm not receiving the thing that's valuable to me, sexual intimacy, then I need you to know what it's like, genuinely how I feel experienced of not getting what I need. And this is one of those, it's sort of a culturally and societally charged topic, right? When we start talking about sex and we talk about emotion, because it's heteronormative and it's traditional and stereotypical and all that jazz. It's easy for me and for most people to say, well, um, don't have sex, right? Suspend the guy from having sex. Really difficult if I were to say, have sex with the guy, just have sex every single day. That would be inappropriate, right? And yet, from an emotional perspective, I'm asking the same thing, right? I'm asking you to suspend something that's highly needed and desirable for you in hopes that your partner, then when they receive the thing that they're looking for, will then in turn provide it back, right? So we explain that, we talk about that. We really don't implement that direct prescription until there is as close to a complete understanding of that sacrifice, of what that sacrifice means, of the impact it will have on not just the relationship, but other aspects. Only really until that point do we then lean into that direct prescription.
I'm glad you brought that up, and it's opening up the concept of just the process of change too for each individual. Some people may hear that and mean both parties could be like, all right, cool, we got our solution, let's rock and roll, because that's their temperament, that's what they came to therapy for.
Sure.
But we know that that's actually to me a little bit more rare for what we see because we are working with a
Yeah.
lot of couples who are feeling really stuck. But if we think about each individual in that space with us, they process change differently.
Yeah.
And this is a change that your partner, maybe it's one you're building off of previous strings. So it's like kind of revisiting something. But oftentimes I feel like it's really getting curious with each individual to figure out what what do you need? So the contemplation piece of this to prepare for to actually take action for this change that's within the relationship. So that does get into some of the initiation bind for sure, because that's more like figuring out what I need and what's causing, the holdup, if you will. But I
Yeah.
think that's an important part of this and for the individuals within the relationship too to see someone, I mean, I have people who love getting homework and they come back and they're like, I did my homework. And then the other person's like, I didn't. And so it's giving space for those differences.
Yes.
But I think it's also giving a lot of compassion for the fact that we're asking for someone, or you're asking for someone as a partner to step outside their comfort zone. And that you've said it multiple times, Kendall and Sapna too, like this is vulnerable work that requires so much courage, but it also requires safety. So how do we as therapists create safety is by creating this compassion with the process itself to
Yeah.
create some of this movement. It's not as simple as saying you're stuck. I think that, to your point, there are times where that direct prescription is something that is needed, but
Sure.
also it's like, I just want to say that's for people who are listening to be like, yeah, like this is a process and let's get really curious about what that process looks like for my partner, because this is how it looks for me. And
Yeah.
those don't have to be the same thing, but if we're both working towards the shared goal, for each other, then okay, that feels again, we're joined in this.
Yeah. And the reality is that the dilemma really, the dilemma from the outside perspective is not can one individual provide what the other person is looking for? Can Joe provide Sarah with sex or emotional intimacy? Can Sarah provide Joe with sex? It's usually not the compatibility of can this happen, because to someone mentioned this earlier, it's been happening over the course of the length of the relationship. The dilemma is we both know you can do this, yet there's paralysis, right? Like a simple, very basic comparison would be like you both come in and tell me you haven't had water in a week. I mean, you have cotton mouth, you're dry, you are on the verge of collapse. And your partner has the glass of water that you want. Both of you have it in your hands. And the only way that you can consume this water is if I give it to you, right? Yet I'm unwilling to give that to you. There's some sort of paralysis. There's something that's telling me that I can't do this. And if I do give you the water, then my fear is that you won't give me the water, right? It there's at a simple basic fact or at a simple like comparison, that's what we're describing. But what's difficult to see is that I'm afraid to give you the water because the last time that you gave me water, it felt poison. It felt treacherous. It felt harmful. Whether that was your intent or not, I was injured or I was incapacitated because of it, as a result of it. So that's why we take so much time to process, okay, what is water would be good for me in this way. It's valuable in this way. This is what it means. It's not just that it would save my life because I'm parched. It's that it means all these different factors. And then we also have to take the time to recognize why I'm so scared to accept it, or why I can even see that you're trying to give me this, right? Here I am over here in the example I gave earlier. I'm trying to do for you what you're looking for. I'm trying to give you the water, and I see you just kind of looking everywhere else but the thing I'm trying to provide, right? It's navigating that laundry list of complex situations. It's why you can do it outside of therapy, certainly, but it's why it's incredibly fucking difficult to do. It's why we need usually, or certainly want that third person to kind of put it on the bulletin board and say, this leads to this, leads to this, leads to this, leads to this, leads to this.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think when both of you were saying that, I mean, Mandy, you mentioned like it's our job to create safety, and absolutely it is. And I want to emphasize how crucial that is, of like, that's a huge part of our work and our job in working with couples dealing with these issues, especially, um, is to establish that there is safety, like emotional, physical, obviously, but especially emotional safety too,
Yes.
before you can really move on. Because I think that's kind of what's underlying in a lot of these interactions is there inherent safety? Do you feel safe that, you will give the water and it won't be poisoned, and I will give the
Yes.
water and it won't be poisoned? To use your metaphor, do you feel safe that if you become vulnerable, that I will be receptive, I won't be condescending, and I will meet your needs, or that I will put my needs before yours, and that will be painful and lead to less safety? Um,
Yeah.
and so, kind of creating that in the therapy room, and also helping couples to enhance that and create that more intentionally on their own too, which can be really challenging and can be, yet again, another process, especially if there's wounds that have happened, that have
Yes.
influenced the process with couples too.
Yes. What's incredibly, I would say, critical is delineating the difference between what is safe versus comfortable. Because our job as therapists is certainly to keep you safe, but it is not to keep you comfortable,
Yeah.
right? And distinguishing us is essentially whenever we debrief after a week or we do debrief after sessions or after homework or what have you, I want to ensure, yes, that you're safe, that we're not repeating previous patterns of ineffective behavior, right? I don't want to recreate that thing that brought you fear in the first place. But knowing you have anxiety, knowing that you're concerned that something might not happen is not an issue of safety. It's a matter of comfortability, right? So being able to help people delineate or really not conflate the two is huge early on because the whole everything about this particular situation, this dynamic, it doesn't usually happen until much later when there's already it's a pressure cooker already. It's highly emotionally charged. Ain't no fucking way it's comfortable. Nothing about it is comfortable. It requires vulnerability throughout the entire time, and by its very nature, it's uncomfortable. Getting people to realize that, I think, is also super, super helpful early on.
Mhm.
I think that's the key point of awareness as we're talking through all of this is for everything that we're talking about conceptually, how to break it down and absorb it in your own experiences of when I feel this way, what can I do? And I do feel like a takeaway is to first notice when you're feeling that discomfort and I mean curiosity is my favorite thing, but to start getting curious of what it means to you and what it represents that may be an unmet need. But I think before you jump into that, it's just giving yourself some space to explore that first. Because I think that it's very common to want to jump to the solution, but in order, I think from my experience, to get to the solution is to really understand it pretty well first. So I have been enjoying this conversation so much, and I feel like we could keep talking endlessly to solve all the binds in the world, but what do we not get to today that might be helpful for us to say before we wrap up?
I would say while while I used a whole bunch as an example in our conversation today, one specific bind of sexual and emotional intimacy, that we can see that that can be manifested in several other ways, right? That can be experienced in intellectual and emotional intimacy. I feel like I need to have common interest or commonality before I can feel safe or close to you or be forthcoming with my emotions, right? That's a bind in its own right. I see those things as well. The common one that I see the most though is the sexual versus emotional bind. So
Mhm.
if you feel like you're experiencing it in other areas, you might be. It's not exclusive to just that particular bind.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because as you were describing that, I can already think of multiple examples that we've talked through of if I feel stuck, if I feel that paralysis, or I just feel like I'm kind of in a lose-lose situation, that's a good indicator that there's more to uncover.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I think a takeaway or two that I would like to leave listeners with is that it's absolutely normal. It happens, and that, as we talked about, there's a couple different things that you can do, but even just the small steps of trying something different, getting a little more curious than you would, both about yourself and your partner. And if you have the ability to talk to a couples counselor, that would be very helpful too. But also, if not, then, you know, there'll be resources. We'll create
Hmm.
some resources.
For sure.
But creating that safety between the two of you, even if that means maybe going back to the core of your relationship, of friendship, of care in whatever ways, that might be another way of changing your dynamic as it is right now.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Kendall. How can
Yeah.
people reach out to you to work through those binds?
Yeah. You can contact me directly via my phone. So 512-920-3654, or by my email, counseling@kendallcampbell.com. Or you
Amazing.
go to my site, which is just my name, kendallcampbell.com.
That'll work. We'll put all of that in the show notes too for y'all to be able to access. So thank you again.
Thanks so
Yeah.
much, Kendall.